Hey guys, welcome back. I woke up this morning and it was 28 degrees and I realized it's time for a winter orchid care guide. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to grow your orchids indoors with winter conditions. These are tropical plants, and if you live in a place like I do, like in New York City, you want everything inside, but things change. Humidity changes, the light changes, the fertilizer requirements change, and orchids grow differently. So in today's video, I'm going to show you everything you need to know on how to take care of these guys in the winter. So with that said, let's jump right in. Okay, the first thing that changes in the winter is you have a lot less light. So I grow everything under LED lights. And in the summer, I give 14 hours. In the spring and fall, I give about 13 hours of light. And then in the winter, I reduce that down to 12 hours a day. There's seasonal differences in the orchids when they're growing out in the wild. So that's why I taper back the light in the winter, because they'll generally get less light in the winter unless they're right in the equator. But generally, you want to give them a tiny bit less light. However, if you grow on windowsills, you're going to get significantly less light, especially if you live in the extremes, much further away from the equator. So here in New York, the sun is going down around 4:30 p.m. So you may have to supplement with additional light if you want to keep your orchids growing. So that's something that I recommend. You may want to get them a little bit closer to your window. So let's say you're growing an orchid in a southern facing exposure. So you keep it a little further away. In the winter, you may want to bring it a little bit closer. If you're using a sheer curtain or something like that, there's not much else you can do to get more intensity other than changing the orientation. So if you're in a north facing window, if you're here in the northern hemisphere, that's not going to be enough. So you could change it to an east or a south facing window. In short, you want to give it a little bit more light because there's going to be less sunlight. And if you're growing under LED lights, just give it slightly less light than in the summer. One thing to note in the winter is orchids need to be generally Cattleyas, Dendrobiums, Phalaenopsis. You want the temperatures to be over 60 degrees. So one thing to keep in mind if you're growing with windowsills, just be very careful with any drafts. Make sure you insulate your windows so that your orchids aren't suffering from too much, so that the orchids are not too cool or suffering too much. They don't like drafts, they like things steady, so just keep that in mind. If you have some old drafty windows, that won't be an ideal spot. But if you have something insulated or a place where the temperature can stay above 60, generally, we prefer even more than that for some other types. You just want to keep that top of mind. If you're not getting enough light, you may want to supplement with a grow light. They're super cheap. You could get a clip-on light, just add a couple hours, and it'll help. Okay, the temperatures have dropped, the humidity is down. So again, I mentioned drafts. You want to be very careful that your orchids are not in the way of drafts or radiators. So the radiators are coming on. I have a radiator right here that I keep off in this room, and the temperatures stay pretty stable. It's actually 79 degrees. Let's see. Well, that's looking a little sad. It is 79 degrees. So it stays pretty warm in here despite it being cooler outside, much cooler outside. So try to keep things away from drafts. If you open up a window, be very careful. Just know these are tropical plants. They are not going to appreciate that. As I said, insulate the windows to avoid drafts. But again, orchids need a slight temperature drop at night. That happens in this room because these lights warm everything up, and then when they come off, they kind of drop the temperatures by 10 degrees anyway, but you don't want anything too extreme. So keep that in mind. You want your temperatures above 60, preferably above 65 degrees in your orchids. Generally, most Cattleyas, most Phalaenopsis, most Dendrobiums are going to stay nice and happy. Okay, humidity is such a struggle this time of year. I actually made this video because I touched something and I got electric shock because the humidity was so low. So I was like, all right, gotta do something. So As I said, you want to keep away from radiators, but there's different things that you can do to increase the humidity. When you have orchids that are potted up, they don't need as much humidity as something that's bare root, for example. So my orchids, they're not going to get a ton of humidity, but I turn on a humidifier in the thick of winter. I should probably set it up right now, but you can get a humidifier for the room and it'll get the humidity up. It gets around 40 to 50% in here if I turn on my humidifier and I close the door. So that helps. But it's not necessary unless you have orchids that are more bare root. If you have something potted up, when you water, the roots get humid, so that's usually enough. But if you have something, if you have an orchid that has specific humidity requirements, then you're gonna have to be more careful and do like a little greenhouse sort of setup to trap the humidity in. You could do a pebble tray, a tray with water over pebbles. And then something that I do is I mist my orchids. So let me show you. So what I'll do is I will take a little pump sprayer in the morning. I feel like that's not a great idea. It dries pretty fast because I have a fan going, but in the morning I take this. It has a fine mist. I really like this. I like it more than my electric sprayer because it doesn't require a battery, and this is quite powerful, easy to clean. I like using it in the morning and it gets the humidity up. You could do it twice a day if you want, but don't do it at night because it's gonna be cooler, so things are not gonna dry as fast. Talking about watering, don't overwater this time of year. Things are gonna be much cool. Okay. We have a visitor and she might purr and be a little loud. So, talking about watering, in the winter, you don't want to overwater. In general, you don't want to overwater. So even if it's summer, you don't want to water so much, but in the summer, you have the luxury of some heat. Indoors, usually, you have the luxury of these orchids being in active growth a lot, pushing lots of new roots, absorbing all that water faster. At least for me in my conditions, this room gets to 90 degrees, even 100 degrees. I don't air condition it. It's a torture in the summer. Honestly, I should get an AC for this room. But when you don't have as much heat, you don't need as much water. So I'm watering these orchids around once a week, where I go through all the pots. Of course, I will go through any seedlings and water them more often. And I mist them every morning. That helps get the humidity up, at least temporarily. But you don't want to overwater this time of year. And this is just general advice. You don't want to overwater anyway. And everyone's environment is different. As I said, my summers in this room are super warm. Some people can get away with watering at the same cadence all year because they have central AC or the same kinds of temperatures, but don't overwater. In terms of fertilizer, I don't really fertilize much this time of year. Some orchids are in active growth and those will get some fertilizer, but in the summer I'll do like half a dose, and then in the fall like a quarter dose. This time of year I'll do like a quarter dose every other, and some orchids, the ones that are in dormancy, the orchids that do go into dormancy, you could check out this video right here for more, those don't get any fertilizer at all. So I'm rarely fertilizing. Some orchids, as I said, they're going to continue to be in active growth, whereas some orchids are going to be pushing spikes, like my Phalaenopsis here. They're starting to push out their spikes. So those are going to be in flower. Those don't need nitrogen. So you don't really have to fertilize those, really, especially when they're flowering. You don't have to give them as much. But if you have something growing active leaves, active roots, I just fertilize every other week and it's fine. They don't need it as much. Less salt in the pot, that sort of thing. As I said, some orchids require dormancy. You could check out the video I linked. Some catasetums and some dendrobiums will go into dormancy, and those, you could just separate them from your collection so that you're not accidentally watering them. If you do water them, watering them is usually okay for some of them, but you don't want to fertilize them or else you'll prevent them from blooming. A lot of times with orchids that are supposed to be dormant this time of year, fertilizing them will cause them to have cakeys instead of flowers, so something to keep in mind. Of course, this is just like a general, real basic thing. Check out my other videos if you want to learn more about dormant orchids. Okay, repotting. So the last time I made a video like this, someone just attacked me in the comments and I was like, okay, like do what you want. But with repotting, a lot of orchids in the winter time start slowing down. At least my temperatures here in my apartment, they tend to cool down. My summers are very hot, and these orchids and my Hoyas, they're all like super, super, super hot. In the fall, it cools down. In the winter, it cools down. So despite being indoors, my orchids get seasons. So I do notice that they slow down with their growths, and I don't repot them in the winter. With that said, if you have active roots, if you have active growths, I have a lot of Richard Mueller hybrids, for instance, you can repot those if they have new roots, no problem. The key is you have to keep them warm. Like, you don't want them to be with cold temperatures, newly repotted, it'll stress it out. You just want to keep them above 65, preferably more after repotting, but that's just my preference. Do what you want. I think in the winter, most things will slow down a little bit if you have some sort of temperature variability indoors. If you grow in a very controlled central AC situation, you may not have very much variability all year long. So as long as you have active growths, you're okay to repot. I'm just saving it because I'm busy. I have to save my sanity, and then I'll deal with all of this in the spring. It's going to be a lot of work, but I do them 20 at a time, 30 at a time, 40 at a time. Buy all my bark in bulk, my moss in bulk, and I just get at it. I wake up early and hammer through all of my collection. Oh gosh. I'm clearly I cannot have more. I cannot have more orchids. But I got all of these Hoyas over there, so I don't know. I don't know what will be with my whole collection, but I'm going to divide stuff. I'm going to divide stuff in the spring, make some of my big orchids a little bit smaller, so what we're going to do. Well, this is a basic video on how to care for your orchids in the winter. If you're growing indoors, not a lot changes. Be careful with the light. You're going to get reduced light if you grow in windowsills. Be careful with any drafts. Just, you don't want to remember, these orchids are tropical plants. They don't like drafts. Humidity is going to drop significantly. Not a huge deal if you have potted plants. Huge deal if things are mounted. That's going to be serious. But if you have aerial roots, the humidity will be appreciated by the orchid. If everything is in the pot, usually it's okay. But you can use a humidifier, pebble trays, or my handy dandy mister. I really like this. I'm going to link it down below. I got it on Amazon. It is called Extreme Mist High Performance Sprayer. It doesn't get stuck, so I like it. It's good quality. And don't overwater. That's a tip for all year long. Don't overwater. You can water when things are dry. I water some things as they approach dryness depending on their needs, but with that, you will be set for success as we head into the busy spring repotting season. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.